man starts to drink your milkshake, I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
Don't bully me, Daniel!
Some people do not pursue success as a way of living. They pursue it until it becomes the only language they know. At first, ambition can look admirable. It can look like discipline, resilience, the refusal to be broken by a hard world. But there is a point where the thing a person builds begins to rebuild them in return. The hunger stops being about security. It stops being about survival. It even stops being about winning. It becomes identity. And once that happens, success is no longer a goal sitting out in the distance. It becomes a shape of the self. The tragedy is that from the outside, that kind of person often appears powerful, even complete. But from the inside, something quieter is taking place. Piece by piece, connection is stripped away. Warmth becomes inefficiency. Love becomes vulnerability. Other people become obstacles, tools, witnesses. And what remains is not a man who has too much, but a man who can no longer exist without needing more. Daniel Plainview emerges from a world that feels almost prehistoric in its harshness. Dust, rock, silence, injury, labor. Before he is ever a powerful man, he is already a solitary one. The early oil fields do not create softness, and they do not reward dependence. They reward endurance. They reward suspicion. They reward the kind of person who can fall, drag himself out of a hole, and keep moving as if pain is simply part of the terrain. That matters because Daniel is not introduced as a social creature corrupted by wealth. He already seems built in opposition to tenderness. Even before his success expands, there is something guarded in him, something inward and clenched. He presents himself like a businessman, a family man, a builder. He knows how to speak the language of trust when he needs to. He can stand in front of strangers and sell them not just a deal, but a future. That is part of what makes him so unsettling. He understands appearances. He understands that people are more willing to hand over land, faith, and proximity when they believe they are dealing with someone grounded, reliable, and human. But even in those moments, there is a distance in him. His charm never feels like warmth. It feels deployed, measured. He does not step into a room looking for communion. He steps into it looking for leverage. And that is what makes Daniel Plainview so difficult to reduce to simple greed. Greed sounds almost too small for him. Greed can suggest appetite, indulgence, wanting more than one needs. Daniel feels more severe than that. His ambition is not an accessory attached to his personality. It is the architecture of it. He is not a man who occasionally chooses profit over people. He is a man whose sense of self depends on not needing people at all. There is another reason the early setting matters. The world Daniel comes from is raw enough that speech itself feels secondary. Men dig, strike, bleed, bargain. The landscape does not invite introspection. It invites extraction. In a place like that, value gets measured by what can be pulled from the ground and what can be endured by the body. Daniel absorbs that logic so deeply that it begins to govern his inner life as well. He approaches existence like land to be worked, risk to be managed, weakness to be buried. Even his silence feels industrial. It is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of compression, of pressure building under the surface. So when he later moves through more civilized spaces, he never really becomes civilized in spirit. He simply brings the frontier mentality indoors and gives it money. In the beginning, his drive still carries the rough outline of survival. He works like someone who learned early that the world does not care whether he breaks. That kind of lesson can produce toughness, but it can also produce a private theology. Trust nothing, need nothing, let no one stand above you. Daniel's independence feels less like confidence and more like a defensive system. He does not simply prefer to rely on himself. He seems unable to imagine safety existing anywhere else. Every partnership contains risk. Every kindness contains a hidden price. Every shared space threatens contamination. That is why his ambition has such a hostile edge. He does not only want to succeed, he wants to make dependence irrelevant. Wealth, for Daniel, is not just comfort. It is insulation. It is distance. It is proof that nobody can corner him, embarrass him, or control the conditions of his life again. And once success starts meaning protection, it becomes easy for him to treat every relationship as a potential intrusion. Other people are not just companions who might disappoint him. They are reminders that human life involves mutual need, and Daniel experiences need almost like humiliation. There is also something deeply competitive at the center of him. He does not describe his feelings in vulnerable terms, but his hatred gives him away. He speaks like a man offended by the very existence of others, not because they are immoral or foolish or in his way in any ordinary sense, but because their presence challenges his private fantasy of total self-sufficiency. He does not want simply to prosper. He wants to outlast, outmaneuver, and outstand. In that way, ambition becomes emotional before it becomes material. Money matters, but money is also carrying something else for him. It is carrying resentment, it is carrying contempt, it is carrying a lifelong refusal to be reduced. So the foundations of his identity are laid early. Long before the mansion, long before the scale of his power becomes obvious. The work teaches him endurance. His distrust teaches him control. His success teaches him that control works. And once life begins rewarding the hardest parts of you, it becomes very difficult to believe those parts are costing you anything. Daniel's isolation is not just a side effect of who he is, it becomes a method. He keeps himself at a distance because distance allows him to remain unreadable, and unreadability is useful when your entire life is built on advantage. To be emotionally known is to become vulnerable. To need comfort is to surrender authority. So he develops a way of moving through the world that keeps intimacy permanently one step away. He can imitate closeness when the moment demands it, but imitation is not the same thing as access. The closer someone gets to him, the more he seems to retreat into function. This is why so many of his relationships feel transactional even when they appear personal. He understands the value of roles. A son can help complete an image. A brother can help stabilize an operation. A community can help secure land. A church can be tolerated until it threatens hierarchy. Daniel does not necessarily begin by viewing every person as disposable in a cartoonishly cruel way. It is colder than that. He views people through usefulness because usefulness is safer than feeling. If he engages someone as a function, he does not have to meet them as a soul. And maybe that is the first major erosion of humanity in him. Not violence, not cruelty, substitution, the replacement of relationship with utility. Because once a person becomes useful before they become real, the threshold for betrayal changes. Compassion becomes negotiable. Patience becomes conditional. Presence becomes strategy. Daniel does not have to openly reject human connection for it to disappear from his life. He only has to keep translating every bond into function until nothing intimate survives the translation. Sit with that when you think about HW, because HW is not just important to the plot of Daniel's life. He is one of the clearest windows into what remains human in him and what does not. Their relationship is uncomfortable precisely because it never settles into one truth. There are moments where Daniel seems protective, even sincere, moments where you can almost believe that underneath all the calculation, there's a father trying in his damaged way to care for his son. But that possibility never fully stabilizes because Daniel's love, if it is love, is always fighting against something stronger inside him. HW represents connection, but he also represents vulnerability, interruption, dependency, witness. He is both child and mirror. Around him, Daniel cannot be only an operator. He has to occupy the role of a father, which requires patience, emotional presence, and a form of responsibility that cannot be solved through domination. And Daniel is profoundly unequipped for that. He can provide. He can protect in bursts. He can position. But sustained tenderness asks for a kind of self-forgetting that his identity resists. That is what makes the fracture between them so painful. It is not only that Daniel fails HW, it is that he seems unable to choose connection when connection begins to cost him control. The more difficult fatherhood becomes, the more Daniel falls back into the language he actually understands: utility, management, distance. HW stops being encountered as a child with interiority and starts being absorbed into Daniel's machinery of self-preservation. And once that happens, the relationship exposes the truth of him. Whatever softness may exist is not strong enough to overrule the identity he has built around power. And that helps explain why fulfillment never finds him. Fulfillment requires receptivity. It requires the ability to receive love, to share meaning, to let another person matter in a way that changes you. Daniel cannot do that without threatening the structure he built to survive. So every victory deepens the trap. The stronger he becomes materially, the less capable he is emotionally. The safer his position becomes in the world, the more endangered his humanity becomes within himself. By the end, his life stands almost like a monument to a terrible exchange. He has mastered acquisition, but lost the capacity for belonging. And maybe that is the quiet horror at the center of Daniel Plainview. Not that greed destroys him in some dramatic moral lesson, but that greed gives him shape, purpose, momentum, even brilliance, while slowly removing every part of him that could have made success feel like a life. In the end, he does not look like a man who wanted too much. He looks like a man who allowed one instinct to become his entire identity until there was no distance left between the self and the hunger. And once that happens, emptiness is no longer the price of transformation. It is the transformation.